So, as artists who draw or paint on flat surfaces like paper or canvas or walls or whatever the case may be, we are creating optical illusions on a flat two-dimensional surface to help convey depth and 3D-ness, to help convey believable depth and volume. Learn to simplify what we're observing into basic 3D forms such as cubes, rectangular prisms, triangular prisms, spheres, cylinders. We have to build up that skill to simplify what we're observing into one of those forms or combinations of those forms so that we can actually draw those forms successfully. We need to develop a solid foundational drawing, a preliminary sketch, an outline drawing, if you will, that we understand in order to then move on to shade things and develop those values effectively. See, a lot of people, they reach out to me asking me, why do my drawings still look flat if I am shading things? If I am developing a wide range of values from lightest lights to a wide range of midtones to darkest darks, why are my drawings still looking flat? The thing is that your drawings will continue looking flat until you understand that what you're drawing is a three-dimensional structure sitting in space made up of a variety of different planes that can be seen from an infinite amount of angles and perspectives. You can shade in things all you want and develop a ton of values, but until your brain understands that what you're trying to shade is actually three-dimensional, it's a structure that is being affected by light and shadow made up of different planes, it's still going to come across as looking flat. Actually, what a lot of people do is they focus just on the outer contour, the outer silhouette, without thinking of plane changes. You're just trying to replicate the outer contour, and then you shade that and you expect it to look 3D. But the thing is that your preliminary sketch is not accounting for the plane changes. What is coming toward the viewer? What is receding away? Why is drawing houses specifically so helpful to develop our understanding of form and perspective? As with many man-made structures, houses have flat planes to them. And when you're seeing something like a box or even like a coffee mug that is simple enough that you can visualize as a cylinder, when you're seeing man-made structures like that, it's easier to visualize them as a rectangular prism, a cylinder, a triangular prism for the roof of the house, whatever the case may be, as opposed to trying to draw a tree where everything is very irregular and very organic. There is no symmetry in trees. There are no flat planes in trees. Great teachers will show you and explain that even when you're drawing trees or flowers, it is very helpful to simplify them as a sphere. You know, if a tree has a round shape to it, it is very helpful to simplify it as a sphere. You know, flowers can be simplified as bells and bowls and things like that. That is an awesome way to see it. But the thing is that it's more difficult to actually simplify those organic things that we're trying to draw into simple forms because of all of the irregularity. Houses and buildings have flat planes. Some of them, not all. For example, this one right here, this one is not symmetrical. It's not a symmetrical design. There are some aspects that are symmetrical, but when you see it as a whole, it is not symmetrical. A symmetrical thing or object, if you were to cut it right in half, either vertically or horizontally, both halves are the same. They are mirroring each other. Asymmetrical objects or things won't have identical halves. Architectural elements oftentimes have to be aligned, like windows, like doors, roof sections, you know, all of those things, they require alignments. Organic objects don't have that sort of thing. Not only this, but also when it comes to houses and buildings, these are compound structures. What is a compound structure? All a compound structure is a combination of simple 3D forms. When you're drawing something like a box, that is a cube or a rectangular prism. When you're drawing a compound structure like a house, what you're going to find oftentimes is that the base part of the house can be simplified as a rectangular prism, and then the roof of the house is a triangular prism sitting on top of that rectangular prism. Remember those three things that I'm always going on and on about? that you have to practice because they apply for anything that you're drawing, anything at all. Start your drawing lightly so that you can erase mistakes as you go and make refinements. Go large to small, general towards specific. Do not start focusing on the details until the larger structures, the larger shapes are in and looking okay in terms of proportion, in terms of location, etc. You're just making things harder by focusing on the details and getting distracted by details. And the third thing is visualize what you're observing as simple shapes or forms. This house right here, this photo, I should say, is an elevation view of this house. It's the simplest view to draw of a house or building. An elevation view is simply when you are standing pretty much right in the middle of the front plane of the house or building. When you are standing almost in the middle or very, very close to the middle of the structure, you're only seeing one plane of that base structure of the house. You're not seeing the sides of it or even the top of it in this case. When you move on to seeing houses in 2-point perspective, like let me show you right here. I have other perspectives, for example, this one here, which we're going to be drawing next. That is 2-point perspective. You're now seeing the two side planes of the structure as opposed to just the front plane. When you move on to 2-point perspective, you now have diagonal lines for those tops of those side planes that are receding away from you. So this right here is much simpler to draw. When you're seeing an elevation view of a house, you can simplify the house into shapes. Because when you're seeing something like this, it's a triangle, a flat triangle, sitting on top of a rectangle. And it's easy because you have literally vertical lines and horizontal lines and simple shapes. Even this little secondary roofing situation here, it's like a trapezoid. It's a flat trapezoid. When you start seeing houses from this perspective, which is a 2-point perspective, all of a sudden, you're not seeing flat shapes. You're seeing 3D shapes or forms. I'm sorry. The difference between a shape and a form is that shapes are flat and 2-dimensional and forms are 3-dimensional and have volume and mass. So all of a sudden, you're now seeing diagonals along the walls and the ground and the walls and the roof. No longer are you seeing horizontals like those present in an elevation view. You're seeing diagonals. This is just very quick, but again, if I were to visualize that house as a rectangular prism, the base of it, and then the top of it as a triangular prism, I'll tell you all of my secrets for how to keep things aligned in just a bit. And I'm just trying to explain here. All of a sudden, this is 3D. This is a rectangular prism. It's no longer a rectangle or a cube. It's a rectangular prism with multiple planes. This is no longer a triangle. It's a triangular prism with multiple planes. So all of a sudden, we need to pay attention to those angles to create those 3D forms. It's incredibly important that you know how to draw simple 3D forms from different angles and perspectives if you want to get really good at this. What I would recommend practicing would be rectangular prisms, cylinders, spheres, triangular prisms, maybe pyramids. So if you love urban sketching and drawing houses and buildings, and you're just getting started with drawing and you don't know anything about form and perspective, start with elevation view drawings and then move on to 2-point perspective and so on. Elevation view drawings are usually going to come with 1-point perspective, and the vanishing point is behind the house. But let's start with this one here. Forget about the details in this house. Details don't matter right now. We're trying to just get the bulk of it in. I see a rectangle. So once your rectangle is in, let's go ahead and draw the top triangle for the roof. How do I make sure that the top point of the triangle is right in the middle of this rectangular prism? I create a little plumb line situation near the center of my rectangle. And then I just do this, creating a symmetrical triangle as best as I can. And I'm noticing right off the bat that this triangle for the roof of this house is a little bit less tall than mine. So if I want to make proportions a little bit more similar to what I'm observing, I'm just going to bring that down and erase that top line. You're going to notice that as I'm drawing these houses, I'm constantly helping myself with lines. Vertical lines, horizontal lines for alignments and symmetry. I'm going to get started with this little porch, front porch, little secondary roof section over here. So these are the major, largest forms or shapes in this case. And I am moving on to the secondary forms, kind of section that is coming out attached to the front of the house. Okay. I would start with that. What's it called? The trapezoid that I was talking about before. And I would just start drawing it, where does that top of that trapezoid fall? And I know that you cannot see this line in the photo because this is a line that I just created by when I brought together those two shapes. But approximately, I would say that the top of this trapezoid shape falls above this line. So I'm going to place a line there that is probably longer than the line that I need. So I'm just observing the reference and noticing where this shape falls. Okay, and then where's the bottom of this trapezoid? Kind of falls somewhere around there. And you start building that trapezoid. It ends a little bit like if the circle thing here for the roof of the house falls somewhere around there. Then the trapezoid is going to end a little bit before that circle. And then from here, I'm going to start building the other things. I'm going to erase this line that I don't need anymore. And I'm going to start creating those verticals for the wooden beams here for the front porch. This one would come somewhere over here. See how I'm simplifying everything for myself as much as I can? And then I have the little, I don't know what this is called, but there's this little section here that meets the ground. We would have the door. Where is the door? The door is somewhere around here. See how I'm continuing to use just vertical and horizontal lines? The door would be here, and this would continue on the right. The steps are going to be here, right beneath the door. I'll explain how to draw those in just a bit. So this is this little negative space, this little kind of window area where you can see through and into the background. And here is the rail. I don't know if rail is a proper word, but you know what I mean. Like this section with the little, I'm still keeping out a lot of details that I'm going to be adding later. More details. I think it's helpful to add in the horizon line at the back because it really helps kind of make things look more solid because they are on the ground. It's a good practice, I think, to add a horizon line. And in this photo, you can see the horizon line. In others, you won't be able to. Vanishing points are always going to be on the horizon line. So if you can't see the horizon line, you're going to really have to pull from your understanding of perspective and follow. Well, this one doesn't have diagonals because it's not 2-point. You need to really follow those diagonals that you're able to see and visualize where they would meet because that's where the vanishing points would be. A lot of beginners want to move on to drawing houses from different perspectives, but you haven't made time to draw on grids. And then you're wondering why your drawings are not looking right. But it's because you haven't practiced on grids and you haven't practiced drawing basic forms before actually trying to draw compound structures and specific things like houses and stuff like that. I have classes on perspective and form, on drawing with grids. I even released a class on drawing the inside of a room with 1-point perspective. I would say that these are the largest shapes, and I already started with the medium-sized shapes. I'm just missing the smaller shapes and the details. Something that I use a lot when it comes to alignments with windows and doors is, again, lines. When I need a window or windows to be aligned or windows and doors to be aligned, I start with a long horizontal line. And then I use that line to draw my windows. Sometimes I even do a second one when I need things to be aligned. And then I just do the 2 verticals and 2 verticals here. And now my windows are aligned. My door would be here, reaches this horizontal line, and comes down. And from here, what I do with something like this is I break up this shape into 3 parts. so that now this window looks like it has shutters. And the other window is more narrow, and I think it doesn't have shutters, so I don't have to do that for that one. And then the door has a little glass section, I think, to it. And I can erase lines that I don't need anymore. Let me grab my kneaded eraser. This right here is the wooden beam in the corner, and this is the actual edge of the house. When you see the rectangular prisms for those steps, you see the top plane and you see the front plane. Why is it that we're seeing more planes in the steps and we're just seeing the front plane of the house? Well, this is happening because those steps are below our eye level and they are smaller structures. So we see more of the steps from this vantage point that we're seeing the house at. I'm gonna add in this section here, which is the actual floor for the porch. See what I did there? This is the wooden beam here. This is another wooden beam. But see the shape that I created for this floor area right here? This is the floor. And this is the top plane of this 3D form right here, which is a rectangular prism. You see the top plane here. Because again, this is below our eye level. So we're able to see the top plane of this rectangular prism. This is a wooden beam here. This is another wooden beam. And this is another wooden beam. And then if you notice, you see the bottom plane of this triangular shape, which is a form that is receding back and into the house like that. Why is that happening? Because that is above us. So we see the bottom plane right here in front of the house. Now that we have the floor, it's easier for me to count the steps. I see 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3. And this goes like that, and down, and down. See how I'm bringing the little handrails for the steps together into just a basic shape, like that, as opposed to trying to draw section by section. And then I have the steps roughly divided or separated here. So I see 3 steps. I see 3 dark brown front planes for those steps. That is all I am thinking of right now. I'm not thinking of the upper plane, what's upper plane, what's front plane. I'm just separating this out into 3 steps because that's what I see. Once I have those, I can draw the verticals in the steps like so, making the bottom step large or wider than the one in the middle, and then the one in the middle is wider than the one at the top to help me convey that sense of distance. We have this section in the roof that is coming out a little bit here. So if you want to add that, it's just a matter of making that line a little bit longer and then bringing that back with a horizontal. If you want to add further detail into the steps, you could add that top plane. How do you add that top plane? Well, all you have to do is create a couple of diagonals on either side of the step and bring those diagonals together with a horizontal line to create that upper plane for that rectangular prism. Same thing for this one over here, a couple of diagonals on either side. Close that shape, which is kind of a trapezoid, similar to this one here, with a horizontal line, and that is going to help convey more of that 3D structure. Once you're here, really everything else should be easy because adding more detail into the house, whatever you're missing, is really just a matter of oftentimes creating another line right above the ones that you've already created or inside of a line, or creating a smaller shape inside of the shape that you already created, like concentric shapes. And that in and of itself is going to help create the illusion of more detail. You give things a little bit more thickness, maybe add in the door handle, a little detail in the roofs by just adding a second line right above the line you've already created or right inside. And at the very end, once you've drawn your house, if you want to add in little plants or trees, anything like that, you can go in and do that. Little like shingles and stuff like that, I usually just create the illusion of those with lines or marks, mark making techniques. Grasses, that is a lot simpler to add in because, again, grass and plants and trees are organic objects. So you can be a lot more like loose in your approach. The steps and the railings, to acknowledge those as secondary, smaller structures that are attached to the main structure. And this is important because, again, you need to know what that final step is attached to or where it is, what it is leveled with. Otherwise, you won't know where to draw that. And you might end up drawing that in the wrong place. The next step that I did was create the railings that connect to the ground down here. For the railings in this particular photo, it's difficult to see because it's a very narrow shape. You can't really see the depth of it because of the perspective. It's so close together, it's not open. Imagine if the rails were more open. We would be able to see more of the side of it, but they are closed and we are standing like right in front of them. We can't see the depth of that shape, and that makes it hard. We need to bring in our intuition and understand that actually what we're seeing would be something like this on either side. Let me look at that photo. On either side of the steps, we see something like this. And I actually made that a little bit more open, but precisely because of that, I wanted it to see what I'm doing to like get a better understanding of my thinking here. In another situation, if the rails were more open or there were a greater distance between them, we would see kind of more of this. You see more of the front to back, the depth of it. Like if you just see them as a flat shape and you bring those rails together and you kind of block them into one same larger shape, you'd see something like this. Once you have something like this, it's easy because all you have to do is draw those verticals. Right now you can't see this because I shaded it in. As long as you have deciphered this shape and you added that shape in the correct place, all you have to do is then just separate out that shape with those little verticals, and that's it. So this is the ground, that triangular dark shape that I shaded in there, like right in front of the door. That's the ground. I may end up doing more steps here because I made these super tall when compared to this. But anyway, if that's the ground area, how do I create the steps here? All I'm going to do is first separate this space into however many steps I want to draw. Okay, as I said, I'm going to draw more here because my railings ended up being very tall. That's okay. Gives me a chance to explain things further. Okay, so I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. Once I have separated that space into the amount of steps that I want to draw, then we have to, well, you'll see it in the photo, and if you look closely, you'll notice, but we also know from understanding how things work in real life, one of the main rules of perspective is that things that are closer to you are larger and things that are farther away are smaller. And you know from having seen steps or stairs in real life, that they are going to become smaller and smaller as they make their way away from you. From here, what you do is you close these shapes so that they become rectangles, but you want to make sure that those rectangles get smaller and smaller, right? Just a little bit. A little bit goes a long way. And the shape for your rails would also get a little bit smaller at the back because of foreshortening. The last step is attached to or aligned with the floor area. And then once you're there, we're going to actually turn these shapes into 3D forms by adding the upper plane. How do you do that? It really is a trapezoid for that top plane. If you practice with the 1-point perspective grid, then you'll know that the kind of shapes that you see with 1-point perspective is this kind of thing, where you see the top plane and you see the front plane, or the bottom plane and the front plane. But you're going to see these trapezoid looking shapes at the top or bottom. What do I do here? I'm starting at the bottom. I'm just going to do the trapezoid and the trapezoid here and the trapezoid here. And that's it. Because this is the top plane of this one because that's where it connects. Let's move on to the next house. And this one is 2-point perspective. This is what I like to do with 2-point perspective. It helps simplify the process for me. What I do, let me erase a bit of this. Like I've tried to fit this in. What I do is I start with the verticals. So again, with elevation view, the entire front plane of the house or building is flat to you. And then with 2-point perspective, what you're closest to as the viewer of the scene is the corner of the building or one of the corners of the building. This corner right here is nearest us. And then the left and the right planes are receding away and toward vanishing points that are way off the picture plane. That's often what's going to happen. You're drawing something, house or whatever it is you're drawing, even when you're drawing a still life arrangement, those vanishing points are going to be way off the picture plane, like way off. That makes the vanishing points hard to visualize, but it is still important that you visualize them because otherwise the diagonals that you draw are going to end up not making sense and not looking consistent and not looking like they would meet at those vanishing points. And that throws off the perspective in your drawings. With 2-point perspective, you have the horizon line, which is your eye level as the viewer of the scene. You have the horizon line. And remember, the horizon line is your eye level. And then the vanishing points are right on that horizon line, always in 2-point perspective. And then what happens with 2-point perspective is that, let's just say that the corner of the structure is right here. What happens is that the top and bottom edges of the structure, the edges of your windows or whatever it is that you're adding, all converge at the vanishing points on either side. You need to use the vanishing points because otherwise, if you start drawing lines that go like, I don't know, like that don't meet at the vanishing point, you start using lines like that for your windows and you start drawing your windows like in all sorts of ways, that is going to throw off the perspective in your drawing. Let's just say that you draw your door like this and you're not paying attention to the would-be horizontals because it's the horizontal lines. It's the horizontal lines that converge at the vanishing points in 2-point perspective. When you don't pay attention to your horizontal lines, when you're drawing your whatever, whether it's the edges of your building or the edges of your windows, and you're just randomly doing diagonals and those diagonals don't meet at the vanishing, that is not going to look realistic. You're not going to convey that perspective and that 3D form. Okay, so that's a quick explanation of the horizon line, of vanishing points, and these lines that would converge at the vanishing point are converging lines. In this particular situation with this picture, this corner of the building is simply closer to this vanishing point than to this vanishing point. So imagine that this corner is just closer to this one, but it's the same exact thing. With 2-point perspective, there's always going to be this situation going on. Okay, you have a line, you have 2 vanishing points on either side, and then your closest corner can be here, can be here, can be right in the center. It doesn't matter. But there's always going to be a situation where you're closest to a corner and then you have this going on. Okay, and this would be referred to as a grid. Of course, I'm not using a ruler or anything. This is just very rough. What I like doing is starting with the verticals for the corners of the building. So for this one, I'm going to start with the closest corner to us and just situate myself here on my page so that things can fit. As I said, my lines are usually longer than what I actually need. Don't think that I have the height of the building deciphered or anything. I'm just placing a rough line to start kind of visualizing the width of the building. It'll make sense in just a bit. But just create a line for the closest corner, which is this corner right here. That is the closest corner of the building to us. I'm going to draw another vertical line for this corner, far corner of the building on the left. There's a shorter distance between this corner and this edge. So I'm trying to give myself enough space there to draw this other plane. Once you have that, go ahead and add in this line over here for this other edge. And I'm trying to get them as straight and vertical as possible. That is very important as well. In 2-point perspective, verticals remain verticals, and the horizontals, which, as I said, this one, the lines for the steps, this is a horizontal, horizontal, horizontal. All of those would converge at vanishing points. So they become diagonals, but the verticals, they stay vertical. So you don't want to angle them. Once you have deciphered the width of your planes and the total width of the house, we can go ahead and start doing the diagonals. Observe that angle closely. If you're having trouble with angles, draw on grids, practice on grids. I have exercises on that on Patreon. Another thing that I often suggest, print out the reference photo and take a Sharpie and draw a line over that diagonal. And that'll give you a feel for that angle so that you can replicate it freehand with greater success. I know that angles are difficult. There are these little things that we can do to help us see the angle so that we can actually replicate that angle with greater success freehand. All of the horizontal lines, the would-be horizontals on this right plane are going to converge at the vanishing point far off to the right. And all of the would-be horizontals that fall within this left plane would converge at a vanishing point that would be far off to the left. This angle over here, what does that look like? I think I need to bring this down because this house is not that tall. Kind of a one-story house, so I need to bring the roof down a bit. This one over here, I know you can't see it. There is no line there that we can use as a guide. But remember what I told you in the beginning. Houses are really nothing but a combination of simple forms, which in this case is just a box for that bottom base of the house. It gets at a more of a steep angle over here. The rectangular prism for that base box. And then we have the triangular prism, which is sitting on top of that rectangular prism. And if you get those right, everything else tends to fall into place. But you need to focus on the big, on the large, on the general, before moving on to the small. You need to also practice making up for the information that you're lacking visually. In this particular case, what I mean by this is if you don't know where to place this line, this tells you where this edge is because you do see a line created by the roof where the roof meets the wall. So you can see that. You can't see this one. Well, you know that this line ends here, so it has to start, this line has to start here. So it has to go down. Know about vanishing points and that they would converge. But another little tip, take what you do see in the photo. Photos are always going to give you clues if you know what to look for. We know that there is a vanishing point somewhere over here. We know that this line, if I were to extend it, the vanishing point would be somewhere around here. And this photo, another clue that it's given me are the edges of the windows. The edges of the windows would be horizontals if we were standing right in front of the windows. Those would be horizontals too. Let me try to get that in. Remember those long lines that I was talking about with the first house? How I create long lines and then separate them so that I can end up with aligned looking windows. These would-be horizontals would meet at that vanishing point. And if I already have 1, 2, 3 diagonals, it's pretty easy to visualize this one, wouldn't you say? I mean, you understand that all these diagonals need to meet at that vanishing point, and you are given some clues. Bring in your understanding of perspective and vanishing points, the information that you are able to see. So another little tip here, now that we have that bottom bulk base structure for the house, we need to add in the top triangular prism. One little tip that I can give you, because in this case the triangle is over here, not in the front, would be to bring up a vertical line, maybe from the bottom or even just from the top here. Create a line and then use that line to draw the triangle. And then the triangle will fall somewhere close to the middle. This way you can ensure that the top point of that triangle falls in the center of this plane. It's not that black and white. In elevation view drawings, that is easier because you're seeing things from a flat view, you can actually know exactly where the point of that triangle would fall. And it is as easy as creating a line right down the middle. However, I do want to mention that when you're seeing things from a certain perspective, the upper little peak point of the triangle is not actually right in the middle of that plane. Half of this triangle is closer to us, and this half is farther back. And usually, this half is going to be smaller than this half because of its distance away from us. And so that would mean that the top peak is not actually in the center, it's a little bit farther back. However, I always start with something like this because I have found that when I am drawing the roof and I'm adding more detail into the roof, I end up making the point look like it's a little bit off center. I simply do something like that, and now that upper point of that triangle is falling a little bit more close to this edge of the house than to this edge of the house. My tip is start with that point in the center of this plane, and then as you're adding in more detail into the roof, make little minor refinements. Adding these details, it's just a matter of drawing another line right next to the line that you already created. When you're adding those details, ask yourself, where do I need to place that line so that I can convey that sense of distance and perspective a little bit better? And that's it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to replicate this angle along the back as best as I can. And sometimes, because of foreshortening, the angle is not going to be exactly the same. But again, I want to urge you to keep things as simple as possible. The first times that we learn how to draw simple 3D forms like cubes, for example, parallel lines for your verticals and parallel lines for your horizontals or would-be horizontals and parallel lines over here, right? And that is great. That is a great place to start for sure. But the thing is that in real life, foreshortening happens. And this is something that you learn later on when you start delving more into perspective. I don't want to get too deep into foreshortening. Oftentimes, you realize that because of vanishing points, some lines are not actually perfectly parallel. So even though this way of drawing from imagination does help convey solidness and 3D form, by making use of vanishing points and understanding foreshortening, you later understand that parallel lines are not actually 100% parallel, but verticals are. Let's keep things simple here. And I'm just going to try to replicate that top angle that I see in the photo, which would converge at the vanishing point that is way off the distance that this one would converge at, and this one would converge at. The vanishing point for these planes is way, way, way far off into the distance, whereas this vanishing point is closer, and that's often going to happen. Moving on to the windows and the door, and we'll get started with the next one. So let's just say that I want to align my windows, make them look like they are aligning with these over here. I'm just gonna make these lines longer, use a couple of diagonals that would converge at the vanishing point way off on the right, and just draw those windows wherever you want them. If I wanted to add a little bit more detail here, again, just add a line, visualize that vanishing point, and if you're going to add any details into the windows, those wood little horizontal structures, even those, it's important that you visualize the upper and lower edges as merging at the vanishing point on the right. Always keep that vanishing point in mind for all of the horizontals. I'm not going to add too much detail into this because we still have other houses to do, but this was a great 2-point perspective one to practice. Oh, and the horizon line for this one. If the vanishing point is here, we know that vanishing points are on the horizon line. So the horizon line would be somewhere around there. Even when you're drawing the details in the roof, the shingles or whatever they are, visualize the vanishing point. All of this is ground area. Oh, I want to explain something because none of the houses that I picked for these exercises has a chimney, and I sometimes get questions on chimneys. I'm going to add a chimney to this one from imagination. Chimneys are rectangular prisms that are attached to the roof. So let's just say that I wanted to add in a chimney right here. I'm going to start with this plane here. Remember the verticals? Remember how we started with the verticals when we did the rectangular prism there? Start with the verticals for the chimney. Those would be the verticals, right? And verticals always remain vertical. We're seeing the front plane, or I guess you could see them as side planes. This is the corner of the chimney that is closest to us. And then this is the right plane, and this is the left plane. Just like with this plane over here for this rectangular prism, these diagonals need to look like they would converge at the vanishing point. Where is the vanishing point? Need to visualize that vanishing point, or I'm going to end up with something that doesn't look right. Let me make this one a little bit lower. So that's the front plane, or the right plane, I should say, for the chimney. This left plane has to converge at this vanishing point right here. So that's that diagonal for the chimney. So here, I'm going to replicate this angle, bring it back, replicate this angle so that the chimney looks like it's actually inserted into the roof, right? It has to have a diagonal right here. If I didn't understand form and perspective, I would not be able to add in extra structures from imagination. So starting with the closest corner of the house to us. Then I'm going to do a vertical for the back. Right now, we're just deciphering widths, not lengths or heights, I should say. There is a lot of foreshortening going on. So all I'm going to do is replicate this, bring it toward the right, and create another vertical right around here. And then once we have the verticals, we have the total width of the house and the width of each plane. We can start with the ground line, the line where the front wall meets the ground. And then I'm going to do this other line. This perspective is interesting because I feel when I look at this image that if I were to draw a horizontal coming across like that, this corner of this shape for this plane would be close to this corner of this shape for this opposite plane. That is what I'm looking at when I am trying to get these angles right. They may not be perfectly aligned, but they are close. I'm going to bring this up just a tiny bit more. When in doubt, print out the image, draw those lines with a ruler, with a Sharpie, get a better understanding of what you're looking at. Our eyes will play tricks on us, and our brains will always want us to do things, or will resort or revert back to doing things as easily as possible if we are not careful. Cool. I think my angles are looking a little bit better now. Let's continue with the upper part of the wall, the upper edge. What am I looking at here? This side gives me a little bit more information on the location of the vanishing point because I do see long lines here, those long diagonals created by the, is it called eave? That part of the roof that is coming a little bit off the structure of the house and is covering up a little bit of that side plane. Whatever it's called, it creates a long diagonal that we can use when we're drawing that angle in the drawing. Maybe make it a little bit higher. When I'm seeing this, I'm simplifying everything. I am ignoring the little design of the roof where you see layers in the roof, the black layer and the white layer, and the try to just take one of the lines there, whether it's the bottom part of the white section or the bottom or the black section. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. Just simplify things as best as you can, and then later on, if you want to convey more of that interesting roof design, add an extra line right above the line that you've already created. And then this is the plane where we don't see that line in the front of the house. In this case, though, we see lines because of the how the beams of the wood is coming together in the front of the house where they meet. They create a line, and you could use those lines as your diagonals because those lines would meet at the vanishing point on the right. You can also use the diagonals created by the top edges of the doors and windows. Those also create diagonals that would meet at the vanishing point on the right. I could just add those diagonals, visualizing the bottom edges of the windows, for example, and the top edges those would all meet at the vanishing point. If I have that in, I have the bottom line, I have this line for the bottoms of the windows, and I have this line for the upper part of the windows, the upper edge. I can get a pretty good idea of how this angle would be, right? Because this, if I follow these three lines way off to the right, that would already tell me where the vanishing point would approximately be, maybe somewhere over here. Okay, if I were to elongate these, and that tells me that this one would also go to that vanishing point. So with that information, I'm creating that upper edge of that rectangular prism. Now let's do the roof. We have the rectangular prism in, let's do the triangular prism. I'm going to draw a line right in the middle of this front plane, maybe more along the top. And then I'm going to use that line to draw my triangle. And then from here, I can replicate this angle, which these angles are not going to the vanishing points because it has to do with design. When you have triangular roofs or awnings that are coming down like that in front of doors, those diagonals don't go to vanishing points because those diagonals have to do with the design of the thing, not with the perspective that we're seeing that thing at. So when it comes to these angles or angles for awnings, just try to replicate what you're seeing as best as you can. I'm going to replicate this angle back here, replicating parallels, and then I'm noticing that steep angle at the back, replicating that, and this is a horizontal line, or a would-be horizontal line. If we were standing right there, right in front of this side of the house, this would be a horizontal, this would be a horizontal, this would be a horizontal. And horizontals converge at vanishing points. If I were to follow this line, extend it way off into the distance, all of these would meet at a vanishing point, somewhere around where my nail is. When I draw my windows, I'm also going to visualize that vanishing point. From here, I'm just going to do the windows. I'm going to change these a little bit, maybe space them apart a little bit more. These are the windows, and this is like a one-story house with a bit of an attic, I guess. Verticals stay vertical, and the door would be somewhere around here. Maybe my windows are a little bit too large, but that's okay. For the sake of this exercise, if I were to add this little window in the attic, those diagonals would also meet at that vanishing point, somewhere over here, right? So I need to visualize that vanishing point, visualize that vanishing point, and then the verticals stay vertical. Once I'm here, I can just add in whatever detail I want. Just remember that all of the horizontals would meet at those vanishing points. Even if you're adding detail into the windows, these lines, for example, here and here, would meet at that vanishing point. If I were to add lines here and here, they would meet at that vanishing point. Verticals, you can just add without visualizing vanishing points, but horizontals, you do have to visualize. I wanted to add a bit of that little concrete section here. This would also go to the vanishing point, and this would also go to the vanishing point over here. Vertical, vanishing point, and vanishing point. If you want to add any extra detail into the roof, elongate these lines. For example, if I want to create a sense of a hanging roof, like the one that I see there, can create a second line right above this one that comes out of the edge of the house, connected to the back. Elongate these two lines, connect them, and now you have a hanging roof situation. Let me erase this line here. So it's just a matter of making those lines longer, adding in a second line over the ones you already have, and that's it. That's all I'm going to add into this one. We're going to be moving on to the next drawing. Let me check on the chat. How do you get the top angle of the roof and the back angle also? This line needs to go to the vanishing point on the so the vanishing point for all of these lines is somewhere around here. Let me just place a little. If you see my kneadable eraser, it's a little bit dirty, so sorry about that. But and it's a lot larger than the actual vanishing point. But the vanishing point for all of the horizontals in this plane would meet at a vanishing point that would be somewhere around here. All of these diagonals would meet somewhere around here because this is a horizontal and this is a horizontal. But you're seeing the triangular prism become smaller because of perspective. Because as things recede away, they're getting smaller and smaller. That is how I got that angle at the top. I knew that it had to meet all of these other horizontals at the vanishing point. This one at the back, I simply replicated this angle right here. It's a parallel to this one. Foreshortening is confusing. It will confuse you. And remember, this is a digital rendering as well. It's not an actual photo. It's like one of those architectural renderings of this house. So sometimes when you see things like that, or even photos taken with like different kinds of lenses, it will distort the planes and the structure that you're seeing. But don't let those things confuse you, and bring in your understanding of like houses and how things work. And I think you can kind of make up for that information that is lacking or that is confusing you in the photo. So with this one, we have 2-point perspective, but with this one, we kind of have that situation like with the first one where there is this section in front of the house. This is a cabin, not a house, I know. But you have this section in front of the house that is part of it but open, like under the roof, but it's open. When you have something like this happening, I do two things. I either bring that open section and just make it draw it as if that were not open in the beginning, and then just cut into that structure, or I draw the back of the house, so the house without the front porch, and then I just add to it. You draw it all together and then you subtract, or you draw the bulk of the house or the house itself, the closed section of the house, and then you add the open section. Now, for me personally, the first approach makes more sense and is easier for me. Observe this photo. Try to ignore the fact that part of that house, of that structure, is outdoors or open, if you will, and part of the structure is indoors. Try to see it all as one single structure that is all indoors. And then we will cut into it and make it look like a front porch. So with that in mind, let's try that approach that we've been practicing all along, which is starting with the verticals. Okay, so we have one, the corner closest to us, and then we see more of this receding, or I guess it's longer back here. The right plane is longer than the left plane, which is the front of this little cabin. So I'm trying to make sense of the widths of these planes and just creating longer vertical lines that I'm going to end up erasing sections of. This is the right plane, and this over here is going to be the left plane, which is actually the front of this cabin. And I want this left plane to look like it's less wide than this one. Using my visual measuring skills here, your proportions don't have to be exactly the same. You can end up making this a little bit longer or a little bit less wide. I'm just going to leave it at that for now and focus on form and perspective. From here, let's do that bottom ground line where the wall meets the ground. And I'm trying to get that angle similar to what I'm observing. And then I'm going to try to get this angle over here as well, as close as possible to what I'm observing in the photo there. So this would be the wood, light brown wood section, the edge of it, where the wood is meeting was it rock or concrete, whatever it is, where the brown is meeting the gray. And again, you can ask yourself, how does this corner here align with this? Is it aligned? Does it fall lower? Like if I were to draw a horizontal here across, is this little corner higher or lower than this little corner? Using my observational skills, I think it is higher. Moving on to the next step, looking at those lines created by the edge of the roof here at the top. I do see a beautiful diagonal line that is going to be very helpful. Maybe it's not as angled. Maybe my brain is playing tricks on me, or my eyes. So things are going to be hard to see sometimes. And then here, I'm going to ignore that triangular roof and I'm going to bring a line down. And this is hard. A clue that I can see in this photo is the 2 points where the triangular front part of this roof would be. Like, notice those two edges, those 2 points. Visualize a line going across, connecting those 2 points. And I think it would be something like that. Okay. Next step is going to be to add in that vertical where we have that triangle going on, very close to the center of this plane, which is where we see that triangle, the front of it, if you will. And then from here, just do a similar angle to what you're observing. For these angles, you don't use vanishing points because this has to do with the triangular structure or design of the roof. These are diagonals that you would actually see as diagonals. If you were standing right in front of this plane of this house, you would see these as diagonals. Same thing with awnings and things like that. Try to replicate angles as closely as possible. We're going to do this other line for the top of the roof, and this would be a horizontal. So we know that this line would reach a vanishing point way, 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 way off in the distance out of the picture plane. But have in mind that this line here for the top of the roof, this line here, and this line here would converge at a vanishing point if I were to extend them way far off into the distance. And then I think that I gave this too much depth. If I wanted to maybe get proportions a bit more similar to what I'm observing there and I want to shorten this, create another vertical more or less where I think it's making sense. And then once I have that vertical, I need to close this upper roof section. So I need to replicate this angle over here at the back. Let's talk about how to cut into this structure. We have the box of this cabin done. I have to make sure that these essential lines would look like they meet at the vanishing points on the left and the right. If all of that is looking okay, we can move on to cutting that porch section in. So here's what I would do. Let me erase this so that doesn't confuse me. What I would do here is let me observe that reference photo closely and get a feel for where that porch actually starts. You can see kind of a line, a visual line. It's not actually a line, but you can see a line that is created by these logs. I think it's logs. It's these wood sections that are coming out a little bit. And that is where the porch starts, more or less. There's a little bit more back length to this than to the porch. So notice where the porch starts. That line is a great indication of where it starts. That is the spot where we're going to cut into that structure. So from here, I'm going to do a second line somewhere around here where we do see that edge of the actual cabin. You do see that. Very close to the middle of this triangle, by the way, if you were to see how those align. And from here, I'm going to do this line like that. That would converge at the vanishing point. And I'm going to do this. So all of this section here is the front porch, is that open area. This line here connects with the vanishing point in the distance toward the right. And this line here also connects to that vanishing point because they are ground lines, they are horizontal lines. I think this angle is a little bit too steep for me, so I'm just gonna bring this in, can make this wider so I don't have to change things as much. Okay, there's this wooden beam over here. Which are the corners of this open space. See how I'm cutting into that foundational structure that I created for myself to create that front porch. That's how I simplify this process. And this, I think, is a little bit less steep. It's more of a horizontal here. I'm continuing to look at my drawing and noticing if things are looking a little bit off, and then just making minor corrections. But it's very important that we make all of the necessary corrections in this point of the drawing before getting into any more details. We want the base structure to look right. Otherwise, no amount of details are going to fix a faulty foundation. Doing a little bit of cleanup work. I have my base structure in, and I've started separating what is porch and what is inner area of the cabin. Let's turn this into an actual little front porch section. So this is the wall where the door is and the little window over here. This is the right plane of this part of the structure. This is the left plane. So everything that I draw on this plane right here, I need converging lines that go off to the vanishing point on this side. So if I were to draw a door, say right here, the upper horizontal and the lower horizontal would converge at the vanishing point over here. So the top of this door would go toward the vanishing point. Same thing if I add in the little window right here. I need to use the vanishing point. I need to visualize where it is. If I were to add in that little window there. Maybe this door is a little bit too wide. I'm going to bring this left edge in. If you had a wall right here, you also need to use the vanishing point on the left to draw everything that is there. If you were to add in the little railing that is on this front plane, which is open, but you can see it as a plane, imagine it having glass there, like it's actually a closed structure. This side of the glass, if you're going to add anything on that side, you need to use the vanishing points going off to the left. When it comes to this one, if you're asking yourself, how did you know that this one goes to the right instead of the left? The thing is, and if you practice with a grid with 2-point perspective, then you'll know that when it comes to drawing the bottom planes and the upper planes of three-dimensional structures, you're using the opposite vanishing point for that. When it comes to the lower plane and the upper planes, you use the opposite vanishing point on the opposite side. But when you're drawing anything on the plane itself, on the right plane, you use the right vanishing point. On the left plane, you use the left vanishing point. But when you're drawing underneath planes or top planes, you need to use the opposite vanishing points. I would recommend checking out my 1 and 2-point perspective exercise video where you see me draw rectangular prisms on grids. And I think that explains a lot of things, and you can get a better sense for things if you practice drawing rectangular prisms first and understanding all of that. Let's move on to the railings. Let me lighten this. Where is the top of that rail in relation to the door? Somewhere around here. And I am visualizing that vanishing point on the right. And then it comes in, and this one would go toward the vanishing point on the left at a vertical here. And then this part of the railing ends somewhere around here with a vertical. And I'm using the converging lines that would go to the vanishing point on the left. And then the back part of the rail goes to the opposite vanishing point. I have to visualize the vanishing point on the opposite side. And I have these two little beams, or whatever they are called, going down like this, connecting the triangular roof to the railing. And if you wanted to add more detail into this whole thing that we did is the hardest part. Everything else is just adding those lines that I've been talking about. Maybe you want to give this beam right here more of a 3D look. Actually see both planes of this beam. Right, so we could see the right plane and the front plane. Same thing with all of these beams. You see a little bit of the inner plane. Because these beams, essentially all they are rectangular prisms, right? That are attached to these foundational base structures. And we're seeing everything from the same perspective. So If you're seeing the bulk of the house in 2 point perspective, and you have smaller structures that are attached to that house that you're seeing at 2 point perspective, you're also going to see those things at 2 point perspective. If I add in those two planes for these little beams, things are going to look more realistic because you're all of a sudden creating that left plane and that right plane, the same way that you're seeing the left plane and right plane for the bulk of the house. Things look a little bit more believable when you create a consistent look for everything in the piece, especially when things are part of the same structure. And then for the little beams in the railing, just gonna do some verticals. Verticals and verticals here and verticals over here. Oh, these come all the way up. So I need to actually cut into this section here. Bring this down. See how I'm just replicating that same angle along the top? And these come all the way up. So I'm gonna bring them up. If you observe the reference photo, you'll notice that like what we were talking about before, where the upper peak of the roof, when you're seeing a structure at a certain perspective, it's not actually going to be right in the middle of the front plane. In this particular case, this upper point of the roof is closer to the left edge of the structure than to the right edge. It's perfectly fine if I leave it there. I just have to add a little bit more detail into the roof and get a sense for what's going on over here, because right now I'm missing some stuff. I need to replicate this angle here, right here. And then this, so all of this here is the bottom or underneath plane of the roof. And from here, you can just add however much detail you want, replicating lines, visualizing vanishing points still, give things some height. You want to draw the window over here at the back, use that vanishing point. When it comes to the ground line or the horizon line, where would that be? Well, this is kind of not a super flat area. It's out in nature. So this is a cabin. So, however, when it comes to the horizon line, we know that the vanishing points are on the horizon line. If I visualize my vanishing points, this vanishing point here is closer to us than this vanishing point over here, which is way off in the distance. Okay, but we know that, if I follow this line and this line and this line, they would meet somewhere, maybe somewhere around here where my finger is, and these would meet somewhere around here. So you can see how this vanishing point is farther away than this vanishing point over here. As I've been explaining, the vanishing points are always on the horizon line in 2 point perspective. So if I know that my vanishing points are here, then I can draw my horizon line somewhere around here and things will look believable. This was a very challenging one. So if you had any trouble with this one, don't beat yourself up about it. Just keep practicing and make sure that you're solid on the more, simpler structures before moving into something like this. And the more you practice with form and perspective, especially if you make time for those exercises with the grids, you'll be able to tell mistakes more quickly and more easily because you'll know what to look at. Let's move on to the very last house, which is another elevation view, and try to fit that one in here. Very different type of architecture from the first one. But again, going back to an elevation view, we see flatter shapes, at least to get started. A flat rectangle made up of straight horizontals and straight verticals, as opposed to a cube or a rectangular prism that has diagonals. Let's start with a rectangle and go from there. So for this one, this is a bit of a taller looking house. And I know that the roof has slight diagonals to it, but right now I'm just concerning myself with the bulk or the base structure of the house, and then we can add the roof, or you can bring the roof together and block everything in and then separate the roof shape from the rectangle or the square. Whether you add or subtract is fine. Whatever makes sense for you and helps you simplify the process, make sure that you're focusing on the largest shapes first. It makes no sense to move on to the smaller shapes or even medium-sized shapes if the largest shapes are not looking right just yet. That is kind of what would be the rectangular prism of the house. minus the roof sections. And if I were to add in the roof from this elevation view, I'm ignoring the triangle and I'm seeing the back section, which is more of a trapezoid, gentle angles on either side, close that angle somewhere around here. Let me situate myself a little bit better. I'm kind of seeing my sketchbook from the side. Maybe the trapezoid is a little bit taller. That's okay. And then from here, so something that I like noticing at this point is how many stories can I see? I would say that this is a 2-story house with maybe a bit of an attic. That is important because when I add in this other little roof section here, it's a 2-story house. And maybe this trapezoid has to be a little bit taller because this is the attic part, attic section. So first floor, second floor, attic. From this perspective, we do see kind of a smushed trapezoid for this roof section right here, breaking up the first floor and the second floor, which is coming out. Kind of need to pull those lines out a bit if I want to draw that trapezoid. But it's a very smushed trapezoid. I don't want to make it too tall. This is kind of what I see. And then I can start adding in this triangular section here. There is a lot of asymmetry in this house, and the windows are also different and not necessarily aligned. And it's one of the challenges for this particular drawing. How does that triangle, where does it fall and how large is it in relation to all of these elements that we've already added into our drawing? In this particular case, we cannot use that tool that I've been sharing where we draw a vertical to make sense of the triangle and its location and all this because of the asymmetry going on. So we cannot use that tool. When we're learning to draw, we learn all of these tools. It's a case by case scenario. You pull from the tools that you learn, depending on the situation and what you feel will be helpful. I think this is a little bit more open, and I think I need a little bit more width to this house. Constantly comparing my sketch with the reference photo, and even though we're not going for perfect proportions here, let me widen this a little bit more. I want something similar, not necessarily the same, but similar. I'm going to widen this section a bit, make sure that that trapezoid looks symmetrical, and then I'm going to bring this down. And then from here, I can erase this line. I don't need it anymore. We have some beautiful stone details. So those I'm going to be adding. Probably I need to add beneath this, or maybe just noticing proportions. See where those beautiful white beams are? I think they are, well, they are 2. Where are those beams? One of them is right here, right along the edge of this area. And the other one is right next to the door. I'm just trying to make sense of what is going on over here. And then there's another one over here to the right, along the right edge. Right here is where that beautiful stone, there's a beautiful stone kind of section here. And they look like steps because they're like, you have one and then you have the other one on top, slightly smaller. This is the one that is right beneath those beautiful white beams. And then we have another one that is right beneath it, kind of like that. Once you have those 2 long rectangle sections there, if you want to make that look more 3D, all you need to add is the trapezoid-like. It doesn't actually look like a trapezoid because it's off center here, but it's kind of a shape like this for the upper plane of these rectangular prisms. So from here, you go like this, create that upper plane diagonal. And do I see the upper edge of this other one? Not really. So this is a diagonal, and then this is the upper plane of that step there. We'll talk about the others later. And we have this little other stone detail over here that is a little bit higher. I'm just trying to draw that as shapes first, especially with this elevation view. I can start with flat rectangles right under this post or beam. And then there's this window right here, tall window, starting with the medium-sized shapes, by the way. And then the door is somewhere around here, leaving a little bit of extra space on the right. Under the door, You see a little bit of that ground section. I want to make sure that I get in that ground section, just a sense of it here. You see that diagonal there? That area, this is all floor or ground. And then this goes back. Remember, this is 1 point perspective. So we see the flat front face of these forms, and then whichever planes we see receding are going toward a vanishing point behind the house. Okay, so it's kind of a rectangular prism that we see there for this little stone section. Maybe I should make this a little bit taller. We see the two steps. So going back to my little process for steps, and it's hard because these steps, it doesn't have any plants, but I think this is like a planter. So it's actually open here at the top, but it doesn't have any plants. What's hard here is that these steps that are actually steps, they're a little bit lower and more narrow than this. Let's just go with the process that I've been sharing so far for steps. So first we understand what the ground is, what the steps are connecting to. And then I'm just going to do one line for one step and another line for another step. And I'm going to bring this down. Hold on. Let me actually make this more similar to what we're observing so that I don't confuse you too much. So these are the two steps. And then over here, this planter or whatever it is, comes down a little bit lower than this bottom step. And then this step ends somewhere above it. And then I can do the little close these steps just as simple rectangles first. And then all I need to do is create that little trapezoid-like shape here. Same thing happens with this upper trapezoid for this upper plane of this rectangular prism in this step, as it happens with this one. This diagonal we do see, because remember, we're standing right here, right in the middle of this front plane of the house. So because of where these structures end, we don't really see much of a diagonal in the middle, but we do see it at the sides. And we see it at the sides here, and we see it at the sides and at the sides. So that is why there's this little diagonal here. And then over here, we don't see a diagonal because we're standing right here. So we don't see this edge of it. Okay, so those are the steps. I see a little design there. And if I want to add in a bit of thickness or a bit of that design for the roofing, just add in some second lines. Tall, beautiful window here with an arch at the top. And this window is aligned with the window in the first floor. It just has a different shape. So if you wanted to extend these verticals, bring them up, and then create the curve to make sure that the windows are aligned, that would be a good idea. Vertical, vertical. And then this part of the house is actually coming forward a little bit more. I'm going to do a little line there to understand what's going on. I have a window here, which is not aligned with this one. This one is a smaller window. So even in elevation view drawings of houses, there's going to be some perspective work involved, like what is going on down here with the steps, even little roof sections, like understanding what is going on with the trapezoids. And if you have something going on like that, where you see a bit of that bottom of the roof, wherever there are forms where you are able to see multiple planes and receding angles, lines that are receding toward vanishing points, like that is perspective work. It doesn't mean that you're never going to bring in some amount of perspective work in elevation view sketches, because you will, especially if structures are a little bit more complex. It is still far less perspective work than something in 2-point perspective or 3-point perspective. So let me just finish up my sketch here. An extension of this window down here that is poking out from this, comes out a little bit. Let me make this roof a little bit wider, put it close to what I'm observing in the photo. So you can move on to add in any amount of detail that you want to add in. What's most important is that the preliminary sketch looks good, because again, you want to be able to create that so that you can move on to shading or painting or whatever you want to do. Your preliminary sketches are the foundation for everything else. No amount of detail, shading, color will fix a faulty foundation or will lead to believable results if that foundation is off when it comes to form and perspective. So keep drawing, keep practicing. And the vanishing point for this one, because this is one point, it's easier. I'm just going to add it somewhere around here. I think my house did end up being more narrow than the house in the photo, but that's okay. Hope this was helpful and hope to see you around. Bye, everyone.